Hey there, deep divers. Welcome back.
It's great to be here.
Today, we're going to take a look at something pretty amazing. It's
hmm
called Evo, and it's this brand new AI that's, well, it's making waves in the biology world. Evo can actually understand DNA,
It can.
and it can write it.
Yeah, Evo is really something special. It's designed specifically to work with these DNA sequences. And what's really cool is it's been trained on this huge data set
Cool.
of prokaryotic genomes. So we're talking about bacteria and archaea,
Okay.
over 80,000 different genomes.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of data, right? 300 billion nucleotides. And this lets Evo work at a level of detail that most AI can't even come close to. Like, it can analyze whole genomes at the single nucleotide level.
So it's kind of like comparing someone who can just read like a few words here and there to someone who can read and understand an entire library.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Most AI that works with DNA is really limited to just these little snippets of genetic code. But Evo can see like the whole picture, every single letter in that DNA sequence. And that gives it a much deeper understanding of how all these genes work and how they interact.
Okay. So DNA is often called like the blueprint of life, but it's not like any blueprint that I've ever seen. How does Evo actually learn from this incredibly complex language?
Right. Well, that's where this idea of sequence modeling comes in.
Right.
DNA sequences actually have their own kind of grammar and vocabulary.
Uh-huh.
And Evo, as a genomic foundation model, it figures out the patterns, the rules of this language. So it's almost like teaching an AI not just to read like a foreign language,
Right.
but to actually understand its underlying structure and like all the nuances.
Wow. So Evo is really learning the language of life.
It is, yeah.
But what can it actually do with this knowledge?
Right.
I mean, understanding DNA is one thing, but can Evo do anything practical with it?
Absolutely. Evo can actually do some really amazing things. One of its most impressive abilities is that it can predict the effects of mutations. So, these tiny changes in DNA that can have a huge impact on how an organism functions.
Right. Yeah, mutations are a big deal. I mean, they can cause diseases or, make bacteria resistant to antibiotics.
Exactly. So understanding how mutations work is really key for so many areas of biology, from medicine to evolution. And what makes EVO so special is that it can predict the effects of these mutations with incredible accuracy.
Really?
Yeah, and it even does better than some AI models that were like specifically designed just for that task.
So what makes Evo a better mutation predictor than other AI? I mean, it sounds like it's more than just the size of the data set that it learned from.
Yeah, you're right. It's not just about the data, it's
Okay.
also about the architecture. Evo uses this really revolutionary new architecture called StripedHyena,
Yeah.
and it combines the strengths of two very powerful AI approaches:
Hmm.
attention and convolutional neural networks. It's like
Yep.
having a brain that can like focus on specific details
Right.
while also seeing the bigger picture.
Wow. So Evo is not just powerful, it's also super efficient in how it processes information.
Exactly. The researchers actually did a ton of testing to try to find the best architecture for Evo, and StripedHyena was the clear winner, outperforming all the other options that they tested.
That's incredible. So Evo can analyze existing DNA sequences, and it can predict the effects of changes. But you mentioned earlier that it can also generate DNA sequences. I mean, how is that even possible?
Yeah, that's one of the really mind-blowing things about Evo. So it can do things like design complex biological systems. For example, it can design CRISPR,
Wow.
which is this really powerful gene editing tool, and it can generate sequences for transposable elements, which are these fascinating pieces of DNA that can actually jump around within a genome.
So Evo is kind of like a biological architect, able to not just understand existing blueprints,
Right.
but to create entirely new ones.
Exactly, yeah. And the researchers have actually used Evo to design CRISPR systems that are structurally similar to naturally occurring ones. And some of the Cas9 proteins, which are essential for CRISPR to work,
Right.
they even folded into shapes that are almost identical to those found in nature.
Wow. So these aren't just theoretical designs. They could actually work in a real biological setting.
Exactly, yeah. And Evo's design capabilities go beyond CRISPR. They extend to transposable elements as well. It's generated all these different transposable elements that have coherent protein and RNA sequences, which suggests that they could actually function within a genome.
It's like Evo's pushing the boundaries of what we thought was even possible with AI and biology. It's not just analyzing life, it's starting to, design it.
It really is, yeah.
But we've only talked about Evo's ability to work with specific genes or systems. can it analyze an entire genome,
Oh, absolutely.
like the complete set of an organism's DNA?
Yeah, definitely. To give Evo this broader perspective, the researchers trained it on even longer sequences of DNA, up to 131,000 tokens long. So think of it like going from reading a single sentence to reading an entire book.
So it can go from focusing on individual genes
Yeah,
to understanding the whole genetic orchestra
exactly.
of an organism.
And with this whole genome view, Evo can do some amazing things. For example, it can predict essential genes, the ones that an organism absolutely needs to survive.
Oh, wow. So it can actually pinpoint the genetic Achilles heel of a bacteria.
Yeah, and this is super valuable for, developing new drugs, fighting infections. It's just incredibly important to understand how organisms work.
Okay.
And you know what? That's not all. Evo can also generate incredibly long DNA sequences that are they mimic the structure of natural genomes. In fact, some of these sequences are longer than the smallest known bacterial genomes.
Wait, you're saying that Evo can create sequences that are almost like designing a simple organism from scratch?
Yeah. It's definitely pushing those boundaries. And while generating a fully functional genome is still a challenge, the fact that Evo can create sequences of this length with a realistic coding density and organization, it's a huge step forward.
That's incredible. I mean, we've covered so much already, from sequence modeling to predicting mutations, designing these complex biological systems, analyzing entire genomes, and now we're talking about generating sequences that are like the blueprints of life itself.
Yeah.
This is really mind-blowing. I mean, Evo is clearly a game changer in the world of genomics.
It really is. And I think we're just at the beginning of exploring its full potential. The whole field of genomic foundation models is rapidly evolving, and Evo is definitely at the forefront of this exciting new era.
This is all super fascinating. It's also a little bit mind-boggling.
Right.
What are the implications of having an AI that can understand and potentially even rewrite the code of life?
That's a really great question, and it's something that, we really need to consider. What does it mean to have an AI that can design and actually manipulate biological systems?
Right.
How will this technology change our understanding of life itself?
These are definitely questions that we need to explore further, but for now, let's take a quick breather and then delve a bit deeper into some of Evo's most remarkable achievements.
Sounds good. Welcome back. So, ready to jump back into some of the cool things Evo can do?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I'm still really blown away by how well it predicts those mutations.
Yeah.
Even better than AI specifically designed for that, right?
Yeah.
How's it do that?
It's really amazing, isn't it? Basically, Evo's learned all these fundamental principles of biology.
Right.
By training on this massive data set, it's picked up on these underlying rules that apply across different contexts and different organisms.
So it's not just memorizing specific mutations and their effects.
Right.
It's learning something deeper about how proteins function and how changes.
That's exactly their structure affect that.
It's figured out these principles of protein structure and function.
Right.
And so it can look at a mutation that it's never even seen before.
Right.
And kind of predict how it's going to affect things. And the researchers actually tested this out.
Okay.
Using something called deep mutational scanning.
Deep mutational scanning. What's that?
So basically, it's this technique where scientists go in and they introduce a whole bunch of different mutations into a protein, and they measure how well the protein still works after all those mutations.
Like a stress test for protein.
Exactly. Yeah. Can you still function after all this messing around?
Right.
And what they found was that Evo was really good at predicting the effects of these mutations, even for ones that it had never seen before.
Wow.
So that shows you that it's not just memorizing stuff, it's really understanding.
Right.
And it can apply that knowledge to new situations.
Right.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But, you mentioned before that Evo can predict the effects of mutations on more than just proteins.
Right.
It can also analyze things like non-coding RNA, right?
Yes, exactly. Non-coding RNA, they play a huge role in how genes are regulated, how proteins are made.
Okay.
And Evo can actually predict how mutations in those non-coding RNAs are going to affect how they function.
So Evo is like this multi-talented geneticist. It can analyze all sorts of different genetic material.
It is,
from proteins to non-coding RNA.
And it even goes beyond that.
Really?
Evo can also analyze regulatory DNA.
Okay.
So that's the DNA sequence that controls when and where genes are turned on and off.
So like a control panel for gene expression.
Exactly. And Evo can actually predict gene expression levels
Right.
based on these regulatory sequences.
So it can tell us which genes are likely to be active in a cell based on the DNA sequences around them.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like looking at a blueprint for a house and being able to predict which rooms will have the lights on. Pretty cool, huh?
That's really cool. Okay, so we've talked a lot about Evo's analysis skills, but I want to go back to its design capabilities for a second.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that Evo can design CRISPR systems and transposable elements.
Yeah.
Can you give us like a concrete example of how that works?
Sure. So let's take CRISPR-Cas9, which is this revolutionary gene editing tool, right? So researchers basically fine-tuned Evo
Right.
on this data set of CRISPR-Cas systems.
Uh-huh.
So they basically taught it how to design CRISPR, and then they just let Evo go and said, okay, generate some new CRISPR systems.
Like gave it a design brief,
Yeah.
basically, and said, show us what you got.
Yeah. Be creative. And the results were incredible. Many of the CRISPR systems that Evo generated had all the functional components, and some of those Cas9 proteins, the ones that are essential for CRISPR to work, they actually folded into structures that look almost exactly like the naturally occurring Cas9 proteins.
Wow. That's really impressive. You said Evo can also design those transposable elements,
Yeah.
those jumping genes. Those are tricky, right?
They are, yeah, they're super tricky. But Evo was able to generate a whole bunch of different transposable elements, and they have these coherent protein and RNA sequences.
Okay.
And they look like they could actually function in a real biological system.
So Evo isn't just, spitting out random sequences.
Right.
It's actually learning something about the structure and organization of these elements.
Exactly. It's learning not just the letters, but like the grammar and the punctuation
Yeah.
that gives it all meaning.
That makes sense.
Mm.
Okay, now, we've talked about genes and systems, but what about Evo and whole genomes? You mentioned that it can predict essential genes. Why does that actually work?
So to test this out, the researchers, they did something pretty clever. They introduced mutations into different genes within a genome,
Yeah.
and then they used Evo to analyze those altered sequences.
So it's like seeing what happens to a machine
Exactly.
when you throw a wrench in the works.
You got it. And they found that Evo could actually tell the difference between mutations that were in essential genes
Right.
versus mutations that were in non-essential genes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you mutated an essential gene, Evo's likelihood score changed a lot
Okay.
because that mutation really messed things up. But if it was a non-essential gene, it didn't change as much.
So it could analyze a whole genome
Yeah.
and figure out
Yeah.
the genes that are critical for survival.
Exactly, yeah. And this has huge implications, right, for understanding microbial life,
Right.
for identifying new drug targets, for figuring out, how evolution works.
Wow. So Evo can provide insights at all these different levels of biology,
Wow.
from individual genes to entire genomes.
Yeah.
But what about generating sequences at that genome level?
Right.
Can Evo create something that's like a real genome?
So Evo has actually generated DNA sequences that are longer
Wow.
than the smallest known bacterial genomes.
Wow.
Now, these aren't complete functional genomes yet, but
Right.
they have this realistic coding density and organization. So it seems like it's learning these architectural principles.
Like a blueprint for life itself.
Exactly. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if you compare like a city designed by Evo
Right.
to a real city, it might not have all the bells and whistles, but it would have a similar layout,
Yeah.
residential areas, commercial districts, transportation networks.
Exactly, yeah. A good analogy. It's really incredible that AI can generate these sequences that are like blueprints of life.
It really is.
Right.
And it raises some pretty big questions too, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. What does it really mean to understand
Understand life.
the language of life? And how will that understanding change how we interact with the world?
Those are some deep questions
They are.
that we definitely need to explore more. But let's take a moment to just appreciate how far we've come.
Yeah.
From, figuring out the structure of DNA
Uh-huh.
to now having an AI that can generate and analyze it
Yeah.
at a genome scale. It's pretty amazing.
It is a remarkable journey. Definitely not over, though.
For sure. This has been a mind-blowing deep dive into Evo and genomic foundation models. But before we get totally lost in all the possibilities here, let's take a quick break and come back to talk about some of the potential impacts of this incredible tech.
Sounds good.
Welcome back, Deep Divers.
So Evo, it's clearly pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible with AI and biology. But like any powerful tool, we gotta think about the implications, right? Oh, absolutely. I think one of the most important things we have to consider is how we use this technology responsibly. I mean, Evo gives us this just unprecedented ability to not only understand, but actually manipulate the building blocks of life.
It's like discovering a new element or a new law of physics.
Hmm.
Incredibly exciting, but, could also be dangerous if it falls into the wrong hands.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. We really need to make sure that the way Evo is developed and used is, guided by this deep understanding of the potential consequences, both the good and the bad.
So what are some areas where Evo could be used for, for good? I imagine there's tons of applications in medicine and healthcare.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just imagine designing personalized therapies that are specifically tailored to a person's unique genetic makeup.
Wow.
That could lead to more effective treatments with fewer side effects.
Right.
Evo could also help us develop new antibiotics to fight, those nasty drug-resistant bacteria,
Huh.
or even engineer microbes that can help us clean up environmental pollutants.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But, with great power comes great responsibility.
Right.
We need to think about, the ethics of manipulating life with Evo.
Definitely.
And, what about those unintended consequences?
Yeah, that's a huge one. We need to be really careful about releasing, genetically modified organisms into the environment.
Mhm.
And we need to make sure that the benefits of this technology are available to everybody,
Right.
not just a select few.
It sounds like we're going to need a lot more than just, scientific expertise to figure out how to navigate this new world. We need, ethicists and social scientists, policymakers, the public
Yeah.
needs to be part of this conversation.
Absolutely. We need a lot of open dialogue,
Mm.
a lot of collaboration to make sure that the development and use of this technology is, you know, guided by ethical principles and a good understanding of the potential impact on society and the environment.
So Evo is clearly a really powerful tool that has the potential to completely revolutionize how we understand life and how we interact with the living world.
Yeah.
It's up to us to use it wisely and make sure that it benefits all of humanity.
Yeah, and I'm optimistic that we can. I mean, throughout history, we've shown that we can use our knowledge and our ingenuity for good. Evo is really a testament to the power of, human curiosity and our desire to understand the world around us. It's up to us now to use that understanding responsibly and shape a future where this technology is used to improve lives and protect our planet.
Wow, what an incredible deep dive this has been. We've learned so much about Evo, this AI that's really changing the game in genomics. It's clear that we're just at the beginning of this journey, and there are so many exciting discoveries yet to come.
It's been a real pleasure sharing these insights with you and all our listeners out there.
And to all our deep divers out there, until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.